take a detailed look at Pulsar 2849, the dice drafting, space theme Eurogame designed by Vladimír Suchý and published by CGE. We normally enjoy Eurogames that feature innovative use of dice. Will Pulsar 2849 join that list? Stay tuned to find out. Pulsar 2849 plays with 2 to 4 players and takes roughly 30 minutes per player. Our thoughts on Pulsar come after 3 plays with 2 players and 2 plays with 4 players. So, to start off, the gameplay of Pulsar 2849 is split into a dice drafting phase and then an action selection phase that features a large variety of options. First, the dice are rolled, in this case 9 dice in a 4-player game, and are placed according to number on the dice board. The median is estimated, and the yellow marker is adjusted toward the higher amount of dice. Then, the starting player begins the dice drafting. Dice drafting follows from first player to last player, and then back again, so that the first player drafts their second dice as last. The key feature of the dice drafting is the 2 tracks located above the dice. The first track determines the player order, and the bottom track yields valuable resource cubes that are important for using a red bonus dice or for gaining victory points. If you pick a dice to the left of the yellow median marker, so a dice lower in value, you will have to move your marker a certain number of steps to the left on one of the tracks of your choice. Selecting this lower numbered dice may move you to the top position of that track. In contrast, drafting a more valuable, higher numbered dice requires you to move to the right on one of the tracks. After the dice drafting phase, you then use your 2 drafted dice to fulfill 2 actions out of many possibilities. The list of available actions looks like this. You can explore planets, take possession of a pulsar, build a gyrodome, activate a build gyrodome which generates victory points at the end of each round. These are the actions that take place on the main outer space board. You can also conduct valuable research on the Public Research Center or on your own headquarters board, which will give you interesting bonuses and abilities, or you can build radio stations, also for points and bonuses. During action selection, your dice can be modified by dice modifier tokens, which help to keep your options somewhat open. Lastly, you are allowed to acquire 1 red dice per round for 1 extra action. To gain a red dice, you can either spend 4 research cubes, which lets you copy the value of the remaining die available on the dice board, or you can generate a red dice through the research track by connecting radio stations or through planet discovery. After 8 rounds of play, special victory conditions are evaluated, points are tallied, and the player with the most victory points wins. The rules of Pulsar 2849 are relatively clear and understandable. But because there are so many different boards and module-like components, it wasn't the easiest game to wrap our head around at first. As soon as you played a couple of rounds, you'll quickly realize that there are almost no overly complicated rules, and that the game's complexity comes more from the amount of options that you have, which is huge, while at the same time having a limited amount of actions to complete these options. There are so many things that you can do and want to do in a relatively limited amount of time. The components are mostly made of nice heavy cardboard. There are a few extra plastic markers and chips which stand out nicely on the planet board and other boards. An extra set of larger player markers for the dice tracks would have been nice because it can be very annoying to stack the provided player markers on top of each other because they're rather small. The style of the game definitely looks very sci-fi inspired and spacey, with lots of dark colors with pops of neon. We liked the complexity. It can be overwhelming sometimes when you realize that the game is already halfway done and you haven't nearly accomplished what you originally set out to accomplish. But Pulsar is not one of those games which then suddenly results in a huge abundance of actions. Your actions are always limited throughout the entire game, so you really have to decide what to do with your 2 actions each round, and with any bonus red dice actions you may have. There are several ways to achieve a red bonus die. In later rounds, you might theoretically be able to get 2 or even 3 red dice in one round, but the rules restrict you to a maximum of 1 red dice per round. This prevents these crazy action chains and avoids players having rounds where instead of 2 actions they can complete 5, and was therefore perhaps implemented to overcome any runaway leader problems. Still, more experienced players will do a bit better than less experienced players, but for our 5 games, we never encountered a huge gap in points between the first and last player. Thereby, at its core, Pulsar is not an engine builder. You aren't really getting stronger in the form of being able to complete more and more actions each round. Where you do get stronger is by mostly generating more victory points each round, and over the course of the game you conduct more research and unlock personal HQ bonuses, which give you just more options to consider. Your actions during round 2 can therefore feel like the actions you complete in round 7. But thankfully we didn't have the feeling that this became boring, especially because there is still always so much to do. We think the game has a perfect amount of rounds. You feel accomplished at the end of the game, but not fully saturated with all of this glory and gluttony. There will likely still be things that you would have liked to have completed, but just ran out of time. Pulsar 2849 comes with many boards that you kind of attach to the main space travel board, which is the most thematic part of the game. Traveling around the space board with its planets and pulsars feels like you are whizzing through space, exploring and building gyrodomes. The rest of the boards do often feel like just attachments and are relatively themeless, and could be easily exchanged with other boards. As for the gameplay variety, Pulsar 2849 is great. There is so much to do and so much possible variety for each game. There are different end-of-game goal cards that you can use, different research boards, personalized HQ boards, the position of planet tiles will always be different, and the space map is even dual-sided. So many different things to pick and choose from to create different combinations of the game. We really like this. It gives the feeling that the game will stay interesting for multiple plays. But we do have to mention here that the core of the game never really changes. It's not comparable to a game where you have special player powers that are completely unique and individual, which sometimes give a game a completely different feel or approach. So overall, the variety is very high, but the feeling and overall flow of each of our plays always stayed mostly the same. Because of the many boards, Pulsar can become quickly like a typical Euro spreadsheet game with the feeling of optimizing your actions. If you're not a big fan of this feeling, Pulsar 2849 will most likely not be for you. Pulsar doesn't feature very much player interaction. You will be fighting with your opponents over different limited action spots or over dice during the drafting, but overall you'll be in your own little bubble thinking about what you are going to do next, and what to do if that move is no longer an option. The dice drafting part of the game, with its median determination and then, depending on where the median is, higher numbered dice become more expensive, this whole system was really cool and innovative. The true tracks that you could then move on after selecting a dice are great. It's a lot of fun to think about the balance between taking the best dice or trying to work your way up one or both of the tracks to then get research cubes, which are very valuable for either getting red dice or for end-of-game victory points, or to be able to be the first player who starts the action phase and chooses a dice first next round. And this system did function a little differently when playing with 2 players or with 4 players. The dice drafting decisions were a little more open in a 2-player game, and you had the chance to think more about this balancing, while the 4-player game in contrast felt very tight and limiting. This is because in a 2-player game, 4 dice out of 7 are ultimately drafted. In contrast, in a 4-player game, 8 dice out of 9 are picked, leaving the last players in drafting order with very slim pickings. This can lead to the situation where a player will have to pick a 6, if 2 6s are all that's left, and through this is forced to make many minus steps to the right on one of the tracks. But this at the same time keeps the game interesting, because being first in player order comes with a huge price. You pick the first dice and then the last. So in general, a 2-player game feels more open and more like a sandbox game. You can mostly do what you plan to do, whereas in a 4-player game, everything feels tight and like a fight. You might even have to change your plans and think more on your feet, and have some good backup plans if your desired move is blocked. It's just a different feel. For us, the 4-player game felt almost too tight and a little stressful, and spots on the research board were too quickly occupied. We therefore slightly prefer the 2-player game. Also, in a 4-player game, particularly at the end, if you don't have dice modifiers and you're playing without the personal HQ boards, it can actually happen that players couldn't do anything interesting with their dice. There were no options for a beneficial action. In such a game, this definitely feels more frustrating, even though if we're honest, in your second and third play of the game, you should have enough experience to counter such situations. So overall, Pulsar 2849 is an innovative, exciting space-themed dice drafting game. We really enjoyed the game. It fits our tastes perfectly. Pulsar combines variability and complexity without having overly complicated or fiddly rules. The boards are all modular and can be exchanged. The theme, other than the space exploration, doesn't always present itself very strongly, but overall, if you're a fan of Euro optimizers with less player interaction, we highly recommend checking out Pulsar 2849.
Thank you for watching Games Up. See you next time.